outfield now. 2 balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Welcome up, Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, and this is a first for us. A 4-boxer here, Matt Moreno, Daniel Starkand, Scott Geirman. The whole crew is here, and I think for an important conversation, which is something that Dodger fans have been talking about. I think it is going to be magnified more and more over this last month of the season, which is how are the Dodgers going to sort out the outfield, and how are they going to do so heading into the postseason? The way that it's set up is we've got a month left in the season. We know there are guys struggling, Chris Taylor, Cody Bellinger, Joey Gallo among them. You've got Trayce Thompson, who's an unproven guy who is well outperforming his career numbers. You've got rookies like Miguel Vargas that are trying to make a case that they deserve some at-bats come the postseason. And so, Scott, I'll come to you first, but the question I want to ask is this one. How would you handle the last month? How much longer of a leash do you give to struggling guys like Bellinger and Taylor versus at what point do you sort of cut bait, make decisions, and say, this is what we're going to do. We need to build some rhythm and consistency and move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when would it be too late? I think would be, more of the question. I think that this group has earned the right for them to play, as long as they can. Those guys have been together about 5 years, 2017. So I think that them together collectively, I think they need to be given that landing, to be able to figure it out and find their footing. Because if you cut bait, I really don't see, just like I've said all along, I think Chris Taylor being down and in this rut is one of the larger issues for the Dodgers. Cody Bellinger, we've seen what he is, but I think we have to give them that opportunity to figure it out.
Matt, just looking at the numbers here, I mean, obviously these are not going to be a surprise, but when you look at some of the numbers guys have put up on the season, Chris Taylor on the year, 218 batting average, just a 376 slugging percentage, striking out 36% of the time. Cody Bellinger, 199 batting average, hasn't been great. Joey Gallo in his time with the Dodgers hitting 203 with a 320 on base percentage. And even if you go back over the last 30 days, those numbers are very similar. Those numbers haven't improved. Cody Bellinger's hitting 132 with a 265 slug over the last 30 days. Chris Taylor is right above him with a 164 batting average, a 288 slugging percentage. Joey Gallo, 204 batting average, but does have a 519 slugging percentage. So you've got guys that have given you a large sample size on the season that it's not going well. They've given you a small sample size in the last 30 days that it is continuing to not go well. You could argue it is getting worse. While on the other side, you've got Trayce Thompson, who has an OPS over 1,000, despite a terrible strikeout rate over the last 30 days. You've got a guy like Miguel Vargas waiting in the wings. So how would you see this playing out?
I think I'll focus a little bit on Chris Taylor. I would probably give him another week to 10 days to see maybe what he can kind of do. With Miguel Vargas, I've been surprised so far that he hasn't necessarily played that much. I thought, I was skeptical that they would bring him up initially when rosters expanded for this reason, because I didn't think they'd want him just kind of sitting on the bench. That's kind of been the case so far. I think it's possible that, maybe once the Dodgers clinch the NL West, which obviously could occur as early as Sunday, but if not, probably by middle of next week at the latest, maybe at that point, Vargas starts getting more opportunities to sort of see. But at this point, for me, I'm not counting on him potentially being on the postseason roster just because I don't know if the opportunities are going to be there to finish out the year. So to circle back with Taylor, like I said, another week to maybe 10 days to see what he can do. I think a lot of his stats are kind of what we've seen throughout his career. It's just been without kind of the peaks that he is, mixed in the past.
Yeah. And while we're talking about Taylor, let me just jump in here because we kind of talked about this on Twitter yesterday. I feel like I'm kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum when it comes to Taylor. I understand how bad he's been. Like, the numbers are historically bad. But at the same time, we know he's a guy who is capable of getting hot at any time, and when he is hot, he's as hot as anyone. Like, he's either going right or going wrong. Right now, he's obviously going wrong, and I guess just for me, like, I kind of look at it differently in the sense that, like, because Chris Taylor is struggling so much, I would actually play him more instead of talking about, when does the leash end, when is Chris Taylor glued to the bench, whatever the case may be. I'm kind of on the opposite side of that. I see Chris Taylor struggling. I see that the Dodgers are up by 19, 20 games, whatever it is right now. The division is obviously locked up. if you look just at the overall standings, like the Dodgers pretty much have the best record in baseball, like pretty much locked up as long as they continue to play, decently well. So with that being the case, I'm more focused on getting guys right for October as opposed to putting the best lineup out there to win right now. So with that being the case, I'm gonna give Chris Taylor as many opportunities as possible to get right, because he's a guy who, even if you don't necessarily see him in the starting lineup in October, he's going to play a vital role. Like, he's going to be your utility guy. He's probably going to be in there against lefties a lot. He's going to be, coming in, later in games. So that's a guy that, kind of like Scott was saying, like, you need to get that guy right, just because he, when he is right, he could play such an important role. So, with that being the case, I would continue to trot him out there. And then obviously a month from now, if nothing has changed going into the postseason, then you could do some reevaluating. But I also agree with the Vargas stuff. Like, if you're going to call him up, I think he should be playing too, especially against left-handed pitching. Like, for me, I'd have him in there. Every time a left-hander's on the mound, I'd have him in there. And then every time a right-hander's on the mound, I would have him, ready to pinch hit whenever a lefty comes in, because if he were to make the postseason roster, that would kind of be his role. And that's not really something he's accustomed to. Like, I know a lot of people look at pinch hitting and think, it's easy, anyone can do it. But when you're a guy like Vargas, who literally his entire life has been penciled into the number 3 spot in the lineup starting every single day, that could be a bit of an adjustment too. So I definitely think if Vargas is going to be up, get him as many opportunities as possible against left-handed pitching. And if that comes, at the cost of maybe even, playing time for some of the regular guys, I'm totally fine with giving them more rest now that everything's clinched as well. Or
yeah,
not yet, but about to be clinched.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get judgment for that one. Matt, it's interesting because the Dodgers have had the same stance all year, right? Like, this is the Max Muncy conversation that we were having. People wanted him benched, and we said all along, hey, if there's a 20% chance that he can just continue to trot out there, figure it out, that's going to be worth the risk. I think what has changed is we're now 30 days before the postseason. Like, we have run out of runway. We have run out of leash for guys to be able to figure it out. And part of the reason we're having this conversation today is because Dave Roberts has kind of addressed this. People are starting to ask, hey, how much longer with Cody Bellinger? How much longer with Chris Taylor? So what can you tell us about how Roberts has responded to and answered sort of the questions that we're asking?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago when Bellinger was struggling and the Dodgers were on the road playing the Brewers, Bellinger was effectively benched for a few games, and Dave Roberts said it was just to give him a chance to sort of reset and kind of continue to work through some things without the pressure of needing to do it in a game. The hope was that he would come back from that and start swinging the bat better, and I think he did initially, but then it sort of tapered off again. So on Wednesday, a similar question was posed to Roberts with can you consider doing that with Chris Taylor? And I mean, frankly, even Bellinger again, since he's kind of in, another rut, if that's what you want to call it at this point. And Roberts said, with where we're at the schedule, like we don't have that time anymore to sort of rest guys and give them a reset of 3, 4, 5 days or whatever it may be. So I think kind of to Daniel's point, that suggests to me that, Chris Taylor is going to be given more opportunities, at least maybe for the next 2 weeks or so would be my guess. And I do agree with Daniel. I think Chris Taylor's somebody, and similar like you referenced with Max Muncy, like he certainly deserves every opportunity to get hot, because if he does find his swing over heading into the postseason, that changes the Dodgers lineup. Again, it makes it that much more formidable. And Chris Taylor is somebody who has been there in the postseason. We've seen what he can do in the past. And also he brings a bunch of defensive value and versatility.
Yeah, no, and I agree with all that. Scott, let me come to you, because I think one of the things that's sort of floating in the background here is the question of postseason success. And I know, Daniel, we've talked about this. Bellinger and Taylor, what complicates this is these are two guys that if you look back on the 3 biggest postseason hits the Dodgers have had in the last 10, maybe even 20 years, those are the 3 guys responsible for them. It's Bellinger's Game 7 home run. It's Chris Taylor's wild card home run. It's Cody Bellinger's RBI single against the Giants. Like, these are the moments. And so I could sit here and quote off, hey, these guys are hitting a combined 296 if you add their 2 batting averages together for the last 30 days. But floating in the background is, yeah, but they've been terrible in the past. They were not good offensively last year, and then they came up with a big hit. So how do you, Scott, sort of sift through all of that, where it's, yes, they've been bad. Yes, the sample size is long. We're not talking about a 30-day rut. We're talking about a year-long, if not a 2 or 3 year long rut in some cases. And yet, for whatever reason, come postseason time, they're able to turn it on. So how does that data point factor into the conversation for you?
I think it matters. I think that postseason success and historical postseason success matters for everyone. I mean, guys, perform differently when the spotlight's on them. Chris Taylor had a 1,200 OPS last year in the playoffs. And they've been trying to get him consistent at bats every day since almost the beginning of August, almost 4 at bats in every single game. So you can take it with however you will. The optimistic route is you can, understand that he is really struggling right now, and that when the postseason comes around, he's a different animal. The game's a entirely different atmosphere. Optimistically, we say he's going to figure it out, and he's a big piece because he has been a big piece. But at what point, is enough? Is it too much to overcome that he's in such a hole that, just letting him run it out there and trying to find it like they can do earlier in the year won't happen this late, and it won't just magically flip a switch.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think there is something to the postseason stuff. Like, I think guys who have been there before, played in big games, and we're talking about Chris Taylor and Cody Bellinger. If you go back to 2017, both of those guys have played in tons of big games, like year after year, ever since then. So I definitely think there's something to that. I also think it has to do with, like, who are you comparing them to? Like, if you're comparing them to a guy like Trayce, who doesn't have the postseason, lineage that they have, but he's also been going off ever since he came to the Dodgers. I think that's a different conversation compared to, let's say, a Miguel Vargas, who you see the potential there, but he hasn't even shown in major league regular season games that he's ready yet. Like, so I think it depends who you're comparing them to. I'd still lean towards Trayce being in the starting lineup, even without the postseason stuff, just because of how good he has been. And who knows, maybe that'll change a month from now. But I don't think the postseason stuff is nothing. I get that the sample size is still, very small, but I definitely think that experience matters.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out, and it's something I've tried to bring into the conversation every time that we've had it, is we're not comparing guys to some arbitrary standard. Like, we are looking at the 4 guys in Trayce Thompson, Gallo, Taylor, and Bellinger who are competing for 2 spots. Like, we don't have to hesitate, well, they have to hit over 250. No, you've just got to be in the top 2 of that group of 4, and where you stand in that group of 4 is a significant thing. And so everything needs to be included: defense, offense, postseason experience, all of it. And how you weigh all that, I think, is what makes it interesting, because you can sit here and say Cody Bellinger sucks and has sucked for 3 years offensively, and nobody's going to disagree with that assessment. There's not a number you could find to say, no, well, but. And yet, on the other hand, Chris Taylor's hitting, 132 in the last 30 days. So, like, Cody Bellinger's hitting 30 points higher than, Chris Taylor's hitting 164 and Cody Bellinger's hitting 132. So it's like, well, 164 isn't good, but it's better than 132, And so I think all of these data points have to factor in. So let's go around real quick, Matt. I'll start with you, and I can wrap this up at the end. I want to hear how you're leaning as far as an outfield come the postseason. And with that in mind, how would you handle the next 30 days? Like, if you're going to say, hey, Trayce Thompson's my left fielder, I want to know, is Trayce Thompson going to be your everyday left fielder between now and then also? Or are you going to continue to give Trayce Thompson once every 2, once every 3 day opportunities, while giving Chris Taylor every opportunity ahead of him to try and beat him out for that position? So, Matt, tell me your outfield in the postseason, and tell me how you would handle things leading up to that.
It's kind of I think the outfield that they'll go with, obviously, is Mookie in right field, Bellinger in center field. And I think Thompson, it's tough because I could see Thompson. I think Thompson has earned starts in left field, but I'm not convinced that they'll give him those when there's a left-hander. So honestly, it wouldn't shock me if they end up going to some sort of platoon with him and Chris Taylor in left field, where when it's a lefty, because Thompson, at least this season, unless he gets his splits up and starts improving against left-handed pitching, I think that they will give Chris Taylor the opportunity to start. And so I'll lean Thompson, but I think Chris Taylor is a very close 1B. And I think to finish out the regular season, like I said, I would give Taylor another 2 weeks or so to sort of, play his way into maybe being the everyday left fielder, sort of no questions asked. And if he doesn't necessarily get there, then just plan on some sort of combination of him and Thompson in left field. And, Gallo, I think, will kind of just have to be, emergency guy, kind of defensive replacement type thing if for whatever reason they're moving a bunch of pieces around.
And Taylor, in your mind, is ahead of Gallo because Chris Taylor, as a right-hander, hits lefties a little bit better. That's kind of where you're leaning.
That, and I think there's just been enough postseason history. Like Scott and Daniel were saying that I value that. I think that carries some weight. The postseason, and especially if the Dodgers end up getting the World Series, like that, the World Series then is different to the first 2 rounds of the postseason that you just played. And Chris Taylor is somebody who has been there with this team before, and I think they trust him, in every capacity. Even though he's struggling offensively, I'm sure like Dave Roberts isn't necessarily just sitting there to say things. I think he genuinely believes that Chris Taylor needs, one good week to sort of get going, and that will put him back on track.
Daniel, I'll come to you next. Cody Bellinger in center field, I think I'm getting the sense all of us are going to agree on that front. How do you see left field playing out? Because one question I would just toss in, has Trayce Thompson been given an opportunity enough against left-handers to prove whether or not he can hit them? In his career, he's better against lefties than righties. This year is the exception to that. So how would you handle left field? Is there a platoon out there? What would you do?
Yeah, I definitely think the Thompson reverse splits are a little weird, compared to his career numbers. But I do think they've actually been putting him out there against lefties a lot, and even a lot of people on Twitter, I feel like have been complaining about it. Like, hey, this guy matches against righties. Why is he in there against lefties? But I think it's kind of like what you're saying. Like, historically, he's been solid against lefties. So maybe they're just giving him chances to kind of, earn that role and improve. We'll see. But I'm kind of, in line with what Matt said. I think Cody's going to be in center field. I think when you have top 6 or 7 in the order like the Dodgers have, I think you could, for your 9-hole hitter, you could afford to be giving up some offensively to get that type of defense in center field. And who knows, Cody, even as bad as he is, he comes up with a big hit every now and then. So to me, that's good enough for your 9-hole hitter. So like you said, it all kind of comes down to left field. I think, right now the numbers are definitely in favor of Trayce. I would like to see him continue to get, regular playing time. Maybe not necessarily every single day, but I think 3 out of every 4 games, he's kind of been an every other day type of guy. I'd like to see that go up at least a little bit. Let's see if he could maintain this. And I'd continue giving Chris Taylor opportunities. So I guess what I'm saying is it sounds like Joey Gallo is kind of the odd man out here. And I think we're, none of us have really mentioned Gallo as being a starter. So I think we're all kind of on the same page there. But I think that's a guy that if you have his left-handed power bat off the bench, there's value in that as well. So I think right now the left field spot is Thompson's to lose. But we'll see over the next month if Chris Taylor could get right and take some of those at bats. I also think, Cody, maybe you don't want to have him in there against lefties sometimes, and then that's natural. Chris Taylor could go play center field, or you can move Trayce over or whatever. But I think right now the favorites are Cody in center and Trayce in left.
And would Trayce be in a platoon for you today, or is he playing everyday righties and lefties in the postseason?
It's tough with him and both him and Cody, because you could ask the same question for both of them. So I'd say probably one of those guys would stay in there versus lefties. Okay. We'll see. I'd give
which
Trayce
guy. I'm going to pin you down here, Daniel. Which guy do you want in there against lefties?
Okay, I'll say this. I'm gonna have Trayce in there against left-handed pitching the rest of the season to see if he can improve. And if we don't see improvements, then I think he would be on the bench against lefties. But if he could figure it out against lefties, then I think he becomes an everyday guy.
And then Chris Taylor would take over for Bellinger in center field on. Okay.
Yeah.
That's something that people haven't talked about, the Bellinger and Taylor platoon rather than the Thompson platoon. But the more we talk about it, that's intriguing to me. Scott, where you got? How would you see the postseason outfield playing out, platoons, etc.?
Well, Mookie Betts and right.
Okay, good. I'm glad Matt clarified that for us, that he wants Mookie and right.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with both Matt and Daniel. I think Cody Bellinger in center. Postseason matters. I've before early on in their reign, I wasn't, so I'm more like, if you're riding the hot bat, go with the hot bat. Regular season, that should carry over. But players play different. We've seen a hot bat destroy the Dodgers for many years, just come in and somebody comes out of nowhere. I think there's something to it. I'm going to ride that. I think Cody Bellinger needs to be in there. We'll hope he'll snap out of this, whatever is going on, even a little bit. But glove plays, defense always plays. I think that's necessary, especially with, how many highlight plays we've seen him make in the playoffs. I'm going to keep that up. Starting every single day, I think so. I think you keep him out there no matter what. whether it's a late game, they want to bring him in, sure. But I think you need to give him the opportunity to be out there every single day, more times than not. That's just, it needs to be that way. Defensive runs saved in the playoffs is everything. You need to limit that. Left field, I'd love to see Trayce. I've been a big fan of Trayce since he's been brought over. Left-handed pitching, I don't know why he's not hitting them as well as we want him to. I think Gallo's success off the bench might be limited just based on his pure strikeout rate. Like that's in a one spot, he's going to go up there, and that's always been that. I like limiting strikeouts when you're bringing guys in a pinch hitting spot. He's one that, just like you said, he's the odd man out for me, definitely. But I do enjoy that Trayce has reverse splits right now. So if you go in left field, you have two right-handers. So I wouldn't pain me to put Trayce out there versus righties and lefties. But I'd like to see Taylor start versus lefties, Trayce start versus righties. And if you have to leave one of them in versus both sides, it would be Trayce. But I would definitely like to see Taylor in a platoon spot within left field with Trayce, and that's how I would run it. I would purely go by matchups there.
Yeah, I think it's fair, and I just think this is a really interesting dynamic for how the Dodgers. Because I mean, if you've been watching the show, I'm all aboard the Trayce Thompson train. He continues to do it. We were laughing as we hopped on because his last 30 days, his strikeout rate is 42.6% of the time he is striking out, and yet despite that, he still has an OPS over 1,000 over that stretch. And so it's almost the more extreme version. It's basically the best case scenario of a guy like Joey Gallo, but you're not getting it from Gallo, you're getting it from Thompson. It is worth pointing out his OPS against left-handed pitching has gone up. It was 550 a few weeks ago. It's up over 600 now, which is dramatically better than Cody Bellinger's, is dramatically better than Joey Gallo's. Chris Thompson's still hovering around 700. And so that's where it's interesting to me of Thompson, to me, feels like the everyday guy. Like, I don't know why we haven't got there. I don't know why Dave Roberts refused to give him everyday at-bats. Like, I don't want to see how Trayce Thompson performs as an everyday guy for the first time in the postseason. I want to get a sense of how he plays if he has to play 3 days in a row or 3 out of every 4 days. I want to see him in there against lefties and against righties simultaneously, like back-to-back games. So I hope that happens. For me, Thompson's your everyday left fielder. And then I think it comes down to Bellinger versus Taylor in center field. And that's actually a simple one for me. I like Bellinger there. I know both these guys have postseason success stuff in their back pocket, but Bellinger defensively, I look at those two guys as net neutral offensively. You could even say Bellinger has been slightly better than Chris Taylor because there's a little more pop in the bat. But I think Bellinger as my center fielder, defensively, I like where that leaves it. So I actually have no platoons in my outfield right now. I have Thompson in left. I have Bellinger in center. I have Mookie in right. And I would say from now on, I would start to move in that direction. Like I would just start acting as if that was the case, getting these guys every day at bats in the case of Trayce Thompson, and go from there. So that's where I would leave it. And I don't know, Matt, like if that sounds crazy, if that's a contrarian take, I don't know. I mean, I think we're all talking about the same things. We all are very pro Trayce and we think he deserves an everyday role. I think you were maybe the softest on that one, Matt. We all like Bellinger in center field. It just comes down to Taylor. And I think the Gallo piece is interesting, by the way. He's just a worse version of Cody Bellinger, and Cody Bellinger's ahead of him in the Cody Bellinger rankings right now.
Yeah, I think you sort of answered the question that I was going to have for you as you were going. So in the postseason, if the Dodgers are facing a left-handed pitcher, then are you sticking with Bellinger still starting in center field?
Yeah, for me, I don't see a huge difference offensively between Bellinger and Taylor. I mean, Taylor has been better so far, but I think Bellinger's defense plus his postseason performance historically, I think I would just leave that. I'm fine with, as Daniel said, one negative bat at the bottom of your lineup. I just don't want two. Like we've seen it in recent days. They have the bases loaded, and it's like, not to get into an Austin Barnes conversation here, but it's like Chris Taylor, Austin Barnes, Cody Bellinger, Joey Gallo as your bottom four, and you're like, geez Louise. Like, I don't feel good about any of those guys coming up with a hit or putting the ball in play in that spot. And so I'm fine with it for now. Like, I'm fine in the regular season. That's why I just want to know, are these trends that are happening because we have a 20-game lead? Or are these trends that are happening because Dave is telling us ahead of time what he is planning to do in the postseason? So, hey, there's lots more we could say here. There's lots of conversation we could continue to have. We're going to end it there. But Matt, Daniel, Scott, I appreciate you guys joining us. I'm sure there will be lots of thoughts. Leave those in the comments below. You can find us on Twitter as well, and share your thoughts with us there, as many of you have continued to do. So we appreciate you watching. This has been Dodger Heads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. Check out DodgerBlue1958 on social media, DodgerBlue.com for all the latest. We'll see you next time.